Okay, so we can ignore. I'm just going to go to slide number 3. So basic premise is, really
Perfect.
there are two things that business can use to connect on an emotional level with people, and it's the actual physical design and the story. And both of those really need to be self-reinforcing. And really analyzed a lot of functional, well-working, well-priced products, and there's a very small percentage of them that really succeed. And it was because the ones that do are able to forge an emotional connection. And so you look at all the success of the Apples and other small companies as well. But the counterintuitive thing is it's not that people must admire the product. The emotional connection that succeeds is when you make people feel good about themselves. So like a Nike or whatever else is not really about sports per se, it's about accomplishment. And we know that there's really about 15 emotions that are universal. And the best brands in the world at best really ignite 2 or 3. So it's not that people have to be wowed and everything else. It's really about what you offer lining up with expectations. So just like, you could enjoy home cooking and a trendy restaurant with the same enthusiasm. Our argument is that design is not about a singular aesthetic. It's about giving an experience that's memorable and shareable and meaningful. And so those are the things. And even in the aid world or whatever else, the people that have scaled, like Habitat for Humanity, they create a rewarding experience both for, the helper and the recipient of that help. They don't shame anybody. They make everybody feel good in the process. So it really applies regardless. And I think in very complex problems, actually, design makes the biggest difference. What we're finding is that, in healthcare, financial services, because the anxiety level is very high with those decisions, everyone thinks design is important in fashion and makeup and everything, but it's actually more important in these complex problems because there's so many aspects people need to consider, and it's very anxiety producing. So when you can give people a simple, rule of thumb or a simple way to tackle those, that's actually can scale very quickly. So that is the basic, and they're basically saying all the strategic challenges we're facing today require design. They're not going to be changed with more information at this point. We're going to have to discover what approaches work for that. So, and clearly it's a difficult process, but it's worthwhile. I mean, they've really shown that the companies that embrace a design-driven culture far outperform their peers. And, they had, and it's by a large margin, but the thing is that they're attainable behaviors. You don't have to all walk around in black turtlenecks like Steve Jobs or anything. It's really the companies that spent a lot of time understanding consumer behavior and understanding their patterns and aspirations. So those are attainable really regardless of company size. And I think now with tech, they're achievable more inexpensively as well. And really, if you want to create any kind of brand as well and defend your ideas over time, there is really a convergence between brand and design.
I have one question here, Deepa, and is you have slide 4. I over over that one. I thought it was very interesting because I was writing down what you said about we have the design factor, which would be must be paired with the narrative.
Yes.
And that narrative has to do with the customer, the user, the way the user feels about himself or herself with regard with that. But then you have, I saw that, I thought immediately, okay, we have design, narrative, and what about experience? So how the consumer experience plays in this cocktail, let's put it that way. So you have design on one hand, that consumer experience could be included in design or outside design after.
I think it's part of it. You can't dictate the experience per se, but I think that when you do the narrative and the physical design, you can actually create an experience that people might want to share. So, for example, you can bombard people with a lot of information about global warming and how animal rights and all that. We can do that, or we can create a plant-based burger that's, decent tasting. And
Okay.
once, because the early ones weren't very good. And now a lot of people are saying, okay, now instead of giving people a lot of lectures or whatever else, what
Hmm.
can we do? We've come to a place where a lot of people are saying, brands are saying, I'm willing to try it and test market it. And when people start projecting, oh, in 15 years, this is going to be $100 billion industry, now a lot of players will come in and they will make it taste good. And we will have a Latin burger and an Indian burger and a Chinese burger. And, we'll create the thing. So I said, like, the information is important, but even the people who agree with you can't move forward with only information. It has to be manifested in a way, because I think design is what actually motivates the behavior change, right? So this is what I look at as even the best ideas don't have impact in a vacuum. So for example,
Hmm.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Mariana.
Yeah, my question was about, because then I would like to know more about your definition or your concept. What do you call design? Design.
Okay, so it covers basically the physical aspects of the product, the features, the packaging, all the stuff that people are used to when they think of design, the aesthetic stuff, but also the narrative, the emotional connection, and the usability. I think those are much more long lasting, much more defensible, and much more unique and monetizable aspects of design.
Okay.
So in Apple, for example, they
Mhm.
say like your fingers are so sensitive. So once you get used to a certain way of swiping and everything, like everything else starts to feel heavy to you. It's hard to go back to a PC because you have like, muscle memory. Like I remember when I first got my Mac, I was so clunky with it and so difficult. And now I can't use my husband's PC anymore because everything feels very heavy and chunky. So a lot of people don't realize that those things are consciously designed in, and it makes it very difficult to switch once you get used to it. Just
Yeah.
like, okay, I still buy the Microsoft package for Mac because I hate, the Apple numbers package. I actually think that Microsoft did a pretty good job with that. And I'm used to Word and I'm not going to change. So, once you get people hooked on a certain way of doing things and a behavior pattern,
Mhm.
that's what good design actually does. And you can also get people. So I said, but when you offer people something new, on some level, you're telling them that whatever they were doing until that point was lacking or could be improved. And that's threatening for a lot of people. So the only way you can really get over that is by getting people so excited and about doing something, or making them so alarmed, like, wow, is what I'm doing really harmful?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know, and I think that really explains a lot of the things that have been adopted in the bottom of the pyramid and all that too, is that sure, I can lecture people forever, or with a cell phone, now I can find a lot of ways to deliver banking, to deliver information, to deliver all these things. If that's what excited people, fine. Why should I have a judgment about that? But now I can go back and say, how do I use this instrument more effectively?
Yeah. And
And
and you are mentioning something very interesting. I'm thinking in terms of BOP, no? That the big difference, and I was thinking also about my own experience as many other people with keyboards, as you said. For example, I'm a long time user. I was a long time user of BlackBerry, and I think a lot of BlackBerry users were used to have a keyboard. To the extent that the Blackberries kept the keyboard under like a sliding part. But I realized that the keyboard itself was a main component of Blackberries and laptops. And that was for people who live in countries where literacy is low,
mm-hmm.
where keys and letters are unfamiliar. Obviously, having a screen that has visual signs and touches that can drive you to the place you want to go, obviously removes a very important barrier to use a cell phone, for example, or to use the cell phone for more than just talking. No? So it's a very interesting point that you can preview in the design the kind of experience or characteristics the user has. So
yeah, and I think, even with the same functionality, people need it delivered in very different ways. Like if you look at why cell phones were diffused so quickly, there was also tons of local innovation, whether it's M-Pesa, people evolved it in very different ways in different parts of the world. So in Africa, they actually are way ahead on mobile banking because there was no infrastructure. So they found a way to leapfrog that. In India, it was completely, now they're saying, all right, farmers don't really want crop prices. They kind of know what they are. For years, everyone's like, oh, we can give them real-time crop price information. Okay, but if you don't have any means to change that outcome, what's the point? What do they want? They want like some Bollywood stuff, and then that opens the door, and then they will look at all these things to help their children. So,
okay, that's a good point. Mm-hmm.
I said, like, people gravitate to their own interests and then build out from there. And I mean, what I've come to understand, even looking at my own use, is I said, everybody's looking at this as a way to push product. But I said, people really kind of get on the internet to see what they can buy, and they stay to see what they can be. If I look at it, I mean, when I first was at Tuck School of Business, which is like a one street business school. So I was like, wow, this is the closest thing to an Indian village I've ever experienced. So there was no store. So that's when I started shopping online. But today, that's very little of my time. Now I'm actually looking at it for research, reading what other people blogs, looking at, how do I make my chin look smaller in videos, all of these kinds of completely separate than activity. But some of those tips have actually given me direct monetizable benefits.
Yeah, exactly. But it's very interesting. I'm also looking at the 5 factors you have there, the challenges that require design. That's another interesting component. So you are talking about first design as products, but you are also applying the concept of design. Can you go through these 5 factors? So
instead of, if you're talking about sustainability, for example, I mean, we have to create completely new materials. We have to rethink supply chains. We have to look at manufacturing differently. So all of those things require us to do different things, and it requires huge behavior change on the part of corporations and consumers. So, those kinds of things, again, it's not going to come with tweaks by 1 or 2 parties. We have to really look at so for example, there's a very new initiative called Loop that's just test marketing in New York City. And they basically brought together 100 global brands and said, if we want to do anything about packaging waste, all of them together decided to take the risk. And they've started an e-commerce platform where all of the typical products you would like, whether it's Haagen-Dazs ice cream, P&G products, deodorant, whatever, they come in recyclable packaging. It's delivered to your door. When you're done with it, you put the packaging back in this box. It's collected from you. They ensure the cleaning and giving it back to the appropriate manufacturer. And it comes back. So everything's engineered for over 100 uses. And what was their inspiration? They said, there were days when the milkman used to collect the milk bottle from you, and they cleaned it and sterilized it, and we didn't have this kind of waste. But rather than, nobody wants to be the only one dipping their toe in the water. So they said, okay, this is a consortium that started at the World Economic Forum, and they're test marketing it now. But they said the benefit of that has been that there's actually really beautiful packaging that people are very proud to show off. So even if you're not concerned about sustainability, you can actually still look at this and say, okay, you know what? I want this on. This looks way better than the, throwaway packaging in the store. And if it's coming to me, I'm saving time and effort of going out shopping. So they said, the thing is, I think design expands market size also. So
Yeah.
market sizes are not fixed. I mean, if you had the clunky cell phones that first came out in the late 80s, you could make that at any price. No one wants to carry around a 4-pound brick,
Yes.
right? It's only through the iterations and putting meaningful things like being able to take photo and video that suddenly today something that was a want has become a need of modern society. That's a pretty significant transformation.
Without a doubt, yes. That's a very interesting. So I can see sustainability, consumer experience, of course, the business model or new business model creation, innovation. What about the design with regards to workforce engagement and skilling?
Well,
What
for
are
example, yeah, so there's some really interesting paradigms there as well, because, for example, I have a friend who works for SAP in India, and they had a client that was opening up a cupcake chain, and they used to offer like 20 different flavors of cupcakes daily. And simple thing, how do you train bakers? Because they're all very complex creations and different garnishes and everything else. So what they did is they actually created a game for their workers rather than making them sit there in the after hours and get bored and have some instructor who even forgets the details. They basically had training videos. This is how you prepare. Like when you come in, these are the cupcakes you're going to be preparing, and here's the video.
yeah,
And here's the game. And they made it kind of fun and interesting. And suddenly they're like, oh, okay, actually people are executing this much faster than they have even in other locations with a, less educated workforce because of the way the training is done. What's really fascinating is even in this country, the second biggest, online job training is, you'll never guess who.
oh,
Goodwill.
goodwill. Oh wow.
30 million people log on every year, and they have very simple modules like, how do you write a cover letter? How do you edit a Word doc? And it's a very simple, obvious once you think about it. They said if people are shopping in Goodwill, obviously they may have fallen on hard times. So sure, you want to provide a Band-Aid, let people survive that, but also help lift them into, get them back into the job market. So they're very simple things. Well, how do you answer basic job questions? And they're very small, digestible modules. And I have friends in India who have partnered with Cisco and everything. And the jury's still out because it's new, but they basically will pluck people from the villages who are literate, but have missed maybe 3-4 years of school. And then it becomes very difficult, emotionally and everything to go back. But they basically interview them for attitude, and they say, you have to come away to our training center and have a completely immersive environment. Everything. So soft skills, grooming, the whole works. But they can teach people functional English, basic digital skills and everything within 6 months. And what's interesting is they said they also have the board exam for passing high school, which is pretty tough. And they said 80% of their graduates finish this exam within 2 tries. So it's like a huge leap to say that, okay, we're taking someone who's missed a couple years of schooling because maybe their family didn't have school fees, they had issues, but you can really lift them up. And a lot of them are actually said, okay, we need local people who can be job creators.
Yeah.
In an economy that big, right? We can't have everybody placed somewhere. We have to have people who can do these services, even for local companies to grow, who can do the back end IT services, who can be the customer service people, all that. So, a lot of them are saying, we're going to train 50,000 people a year. That requires a very different model than, the standard sit in a classroom and do paper homework and turn it in. So I think there's a lot of experiments, and, that's another huge area of opportunity. But again, none of the existing answers in East or West are going to work as is. They need to be discovered.
Sure. One more question about the Goodwill store. Is the Goodwill doing this with employees, or is also doing that with customers?
No, no, no. It's online. Anybody can log on
Yeah.
and do it.
But basically the main users include customers that
Yeah,
usually, a goodwill customer is someone who's basically looking for a product
yeah. So it is
price-wise or
actually for a lot
use-wise.
of
So
customers.
I would like to know more how they connect that with helping or skilling
So
the
I'll send you the
customer.
article. I mean, I don't think, as far as I know, they don't keep track of like, their results per se, but they've just created a
Yeah.
resource. And a
Yeah.
lot of people seem to be actually, they do track, how many people are logging on and using it. I don't know if they track results or not in terms
Oh,
of were you able to find a job, but
mhm.
they have, but I can send you the article with
Sure,
all the
sure.
like links and resources that they have. It's actually an interesting, basic stuff that maybe we take for granted because you've gone through a set of institute. How do you dress for an interview? How do you do
Yeah.
these kinds of things that, maybe are not so, even if you've been out of the workforce for a long time and are re-entering. Um, and there's a lot of value to that rather than creating the coolest new stuff. I mean, I always say like doing the hard stuff is meaningless if you don't do what's necessary. You
Yeah.
know?
Mhm. Exactly. Oh, I was thinking in terms of uh, thinking of you go to Goodwill, you can go as a consumer just for something that you are going to use personally, or you can go as a prosumer looking for something you are going to use in your own business activity. You will try to use to make some revenue source from that, like I'm looking for a jacket to
Mhm.
go to a job interview, no? Or a new dog.
Yeah. These things, I swear, I mean, they're not
Yeah,
nice.
but I need a dog to not just for fun. I want to have a dog that barks and takes care of my house, whatever. What I mean is, if that's the kind of uh, I wouldn't call training, but the skilling that they can get by getting into the website, like I don't know, how can I make a resume or
Those
prepare
kind of
with
things,
this
yeah.
printer something that I need to do? Is that the idea? Or
Yeah,
I got it right,
exactly.
wrong?
They help people with that. Like, just give them the templates. How would you write a cover letter, a resume? How do you approach, people? How do you kind of frame your own experience if it's not traditional? So
Okay.
these are the kinds of things. And I think now, like, people are starting to do a lot more of this for veterans and other groups. But this one, I was shocked at how big it has become.
Yeah, yeah.
Completely under the radar, very lean. Um, that's what's kind of interesting because the number one Coursera and all those things everybody's heard of.
Yeah, yeah. And it's incredible that, I mean, and this is basically what thinking is very, very thought provoking, no? Um,
Well, this is what I have learned in this process, Mariano, is I don't explain the BOP anymore by
mhm.
explaining emerging markets. I said the reason we have a difficult time with empathy is we haven't really fully understood our own journey.
Yeah,
And once we do, like the empathy is not a problem. Like I always say, like in any group of people of a certain age, you're like, okay, how many people had all four grandparents who went to college? Hardly a hand goes up. Doesn't matter what race, how well educated. Then how many of you had all your siblings? How many of all your kids? And the numbers change. I said, so we don't have to look at everybody else. We should have faith in what's possible from looking at our own story.
mm, yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And also, you can repurpose a lot of things just by giving people the chance to play with that and to learn yourself what is going on. No? Very, very, very interesting. I like the idea of crossing the variables between design and these 5 areas and looking at areas to consider. Go ahead. Sorry
Yeah,
for the interruption. John, you were.
I was going to say that
Yeah.
another company that might be worth taking a look at that I'm familiar with is a company called iCow, ICOW.
Oh, yeah.
And I've told you about Mariano.
Yes.
Are you familiar with it, Deepa?
No.
So it was a company was started by a former TED fellow,
Mm-hmm.
Sue Kamumba, and she went to Kenya, which may be where she was from originally, and she developed software that can be used on a mobile phone to help farmers plot and understand the milk production of their cows, and plus other help on how to get it to market, the best timing, appropriate training for how to I don't know about how to pasteurize the milk, but how to store it safely, things like that. So even though I don't know the whole story, if I just take a look at these 5 bullets, on the face of it, it seems to me as if Sue has touched every one of those in the ways in which she has thought through and then engaged with her market to support them around the things that matter to them in a way that's a positive customer experience.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing that's a challenge, because there's so many initiatives like this that are done and actually quite successful. But we also need to find the things that are scalable, which is where there's like this tremendous push and pull, like, okay, this could totally work, in one place. And that's the challenge, because I think as countries come out of poverty, you get what they call, the good, bad news. That's what I call it. In India, they're all like, oh my God, diabetes and heart disease are exploding. And I'm like, okay, it doesn't feel like progress. But the fact of the matter is that number of people with diabetes and cardiac problems represents huge gains in maternal health, huge gains in fighting infectious disease. We are actually living long enough and have the money to get fat, which was not the case earlier. So it's one of those things. Now you have large numbers that you have to deal with malnutrition and large numbers to deal with diabetes. And the issue is that at least with infectious disease, there was a vaccine, there was a known solution. And here there isn't, East or West, everyone's struggling with the lifestyle diseases. Nobody has, a model that you can gravitate to. And that's where I think in a lot of these, the design part and motivating behavior change and learning from each other is going to become really critical, because there is no known model. At least earlier with vaccines, like, how do I get it to everybody? Who's going to pay for it? How do I create the infrastructure?
Sure.
But here, there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. Even if there was the capital behind it, that requires everyday behavior change, and that's a very different problem.
Yes.
And that's where I think for a lot of these global issues that we're dealing with, it's the same basic landscape where, like, okay, I kind of know what the answer is, and I know what the problem is, but there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all way to get from A to B.
And it's interesting what you mentioned. I'm remembering a very old film. It was kind of a comedy called "The Gods Must Be Crazy."
Yeah.
Remember? With a bottle of Coke falling in the middle of the bushes in Africa, and all the stories about what people did with the bottle. And actually, I think that whether it's that or a cell phone, the situation is, that's so fertile, because you engage or let people explore and find unusual applications of things we use for different things.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting. I think that will be also an interesting point for. I'm thinking in terms of what I'm working with Barrio 31. One of the things we are looking at is precisely conventional employment has a very high rate of people who basically do not fit into the requirements, because not just because of the skills, but because of the other things they have in their life that they cannot leave in order to take a full-time job. So many times what you look at is that we spend a lot of time and money and resources in training people for jobs when maybe they have things to do and they could be better suited with a approach like what you described in Goodwill. So they come to look for a product, and in the process, they learn skills to add value or make that product valuable for them. So, and they are interested because they started by looking at the product and engaging because they feel attracted with or by. No?
Well, shockingly, I mean, even in cities like Oakland, I mean, in all these US cities like Detroit and everything, they said really the place that people could even access a computer to look for a job was in the public library. Now, the public library closes at 5 or 6 p.m. So basically, if you have a job and you're looking for another job, you are pretty much screwed. So they said, you know, there was this, I forget his name. There was an entrepreneur I met. He said, you know, what I did is I just created, everyone has a phone, but a lot of families in Oakland do not have even one laptop or one screen to look at. And that's where all the listings are. So he just created a mobile-based platform to give people an immediate alert that how far can you travel realistically and how easy can you get to a place to do like a dishwasher job or to fill in, you know, at whatever kind of service job that's needed, work at a party and bartend or whatever. And they said, what can you do? Very easy, 3 clicks to say what your skills are, what your traveling ability is. And you get an alert immediately like, oh, there's an opening this afternoon or this evening. And they said just simple changes like that, where they didn't grow the economy, they didn't come up with anything great. Right information at the right time alone made a huge difference.
Yes.
Without addressing skills. I mean, now, of course, if you do that, you can probably multiply your impact. But sometimes it's very simple things that at least get the trust and the conversation going enough to figure out everything else.
Exactly. Very, very interesting.
What were you saying, John? I thought
John?
I'm sorry. I was thinking that in the book Influencers, the authors talk about several different situations, if I recall correctly, both of which occurred in Africa, one in South Africa and one in Central Africa, where they were dealing with needing to shift the behavior of minors on the one hand and of village people on the other. In the first case, around safe driving to and from work and the accidents that were occurring, both on and off the job, and in the second, because of inappropriate practices dealing with drinking water, such that people were getting infected and reinfected with intestinal worms. And at the end of the day, at least my recollection of it is that it was because of the systemic way that they tried to understand the customer or the people in context that allowed them to better understand what was likely to be a well-fitted solution. One which, in my sense, handles at least 3 or 4, if not all 5, of the design elements that you talk about here. So there's something about being willing and able to do the upfront work.
Yep. So
that you really you understand your audience and what they're about. So you're not thinking in culturally blind ways, if that makes sense.
I agree. And the issue is, too, that sometimes when you're solving for these very serious problems, you still have to market to aspirations. And sometimes there's a huge marketing problem. Like in India, a lot of people cook on these coal stoves and everything. I mean, so it is an environmental disaster. It causes respiratory problems, all the good stuff. But they designed a very nice, stove with fuel pellets that was almost smokeless. And they had great engineers from the Indian Institute of Science and all that. But the marketing was so poor, right? They finally were like, oh, well, you'll avoid all this smoke and this and that. And it was a good product. It was affordable. People actually liked it. And it just sat there. And a few years later, I ran into somebody at a conference and she said, you will never, I asked her about it, just randomly, we ended up talking on it. She said, you will never believe what finally appealed to people. And I said, what is it? And she said, no, we just told housewives that since there's less smoke, you don't have to spend all your time scrubbing the walls of your home to make it look neat and clean. So you're appealing to the pride of the housewife rather than telling them, you're killing your children with the way you're cooking, You don't want that negative messaging when you're introducing something new because people are struggling and doing the best they can. So that was like one of those things where I said, you could be designing for a problem, but you still have to appeal on an emotional level on something that people take pride in and that they want to gravitate toward. Nobody wants to be told they're doing everything wrong when they've done it for 3 generations that way, right? I mean, so this is one of those aspects that's really neglected quite often.
Yeah, it's I think it's a critical point here. We have this. Let me put back here. We have this the critical factor that means the connection. I was thinking in terms of what you are describing as design challenges or opportunities is how you help users meet with different purposes and their own clients. So the idea of consumer we are used to in more affluent societies is like you have a consumer side and a producer side, and they are not connected. The idea of prosumer is probably much more common when you go down in the economic ladder and you find people who are making ends meet with their own ingenuity, and they have to figure out how to do it. But sometimes we don't have the tools, the appropriate tools because we try to put them again in a separate instance, like, okay, let's go to a classroom, let's put a video, let's get into the library. So all the things that are not so familiar or practical from the standpoint of that user. That's
and
really
I think a lot of people really just don't hold themselves to very high standards when they're designing for circumstances they don't understand. And I said, you actually cannot start by saying, oh, I understand all the barriers you have to conquer. So I basically understand you have to climb up Mount Everest, but I'm going to give you like a bedazzled pair of flip-flops to do it. I'm like, no, do the hiking boot. You really have to create something that's often more robust, more difficult, more challenging. If people had such simple solutions to these problems, they would have solved it. They're the ones bearing the brunt of all that pain. And they're makers too. So I always say, like, if people wanted dumbed down products, they could make it themselves. You do not need to be involved in that process. That's where we go to get our fake bags and our fake gowns. So why are we pretending like, the dumbed down stuff is something people don't understand how to do? They do. They can do it better than us.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I recall an HBR article in which they were talking about how you have to rethink design for bottom of the pyramid that isn't like a simplified version of X. And I remember different kinds of medical equipment. Mm-hmm. And they basically had to literally go back to the drawing boards and learn much better what was needed and what was aspirational in the environment so that they could come up with something that would be usable and desired and sustainable in that environment, more robust, to your point. But it's not like, let me just take what we've been doing in the Western world and simplify it by, remove some of the bells and whistles, and that's going to suffice, because it certainly doesn't suffice on the aspirational level, and it doesn't suffice on the usability and sustainable level either.
Yeah, it's really kind of a way. I always say, like, you know, MNCs really don't need to waste their time competing with counterfeiters. I mean, there's just really, it's a complete waste of everyone's time.
Yeah.
You know, so whenever I see entrepreneurs who are like, oh, you know, my product didn't work because people don't understand it, I'm like, that's one possibility. The other possibility is that it needs some more work, and that's okay, because that's a solvable problem. You know, if someone's not happy with the latest Apple stuff, nobody turns around and says, oh, you didn't get it. You know, we try to figure out how we can still make it better every time. And you accept feedback from your users when you screw up, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, here's the fix, here's the feedback. You don't tell people that you didn't get it.
I'm thinking of one thing that I put there a link, but the link is to be accessed with a cell phone, because this is a prototype for an app that looks like this. What you see there is called Neighbors in English.
Okay.
And basically, it helps people in Barrio 31. That's where Barrio 31 is. The neighbors we are talking about is not just the people living in the barrio, but the people around the barrio who are afraid, of course, of the slum. So how can you make people go to the slum if they have never been there? Because has been always a... And the idea is, I was thinking in terms of what you said, we have here a series of options, and you can look at about, for example, jobs. What jobs are required and what jobs are offered. And the city can vet the jobs. But I was thinking it would be interesting also to test with products, because these people there, they do two things with products. About 60% of the independent activity in the barrio is commerce. So they basically sell products. And of course, they are looking for products to sell. But on the other,
same numbers as in India, in the rural community. Not in slums is higher, but in the rural parts of India, 60% of the income is from entrepreneurship, not from farming, which is a very interesting.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this is kind of a very cool, you know, issue. Seems to be a global pattern. Like, people are listening and changing. We're the ones who have not changed to keep up.
Yeah, it sounds like leaning on crowdsourcing kinds of interventions more frequently, or including that in the mix as part of the process.
Yeah, I wonder also the idea of, for example, if people get to access to different products in this context, they can do this process of working. How could this work for us or here? How could I make use of this product? Or which ways could we benefit from repurposing, selling, making, or applying this product to something else? Instead of, you know, the classical recipes for entrepreneurship that usually are tailored to more structure and different contexts. So that's a thought I have in mind. We are still working in making like a canvas that can be accessed through a cell phone, so we can then bring together or get together developers to work on applications, but basically users can see and test things and figure out, okay, we could do these things, or I have these things, but I don't know how to.
Yeah, I think that's the whole thing, right? Is that everyone has access to groceries, but not everyone is a good cook. So you have to be able to now, like, synthesize this, because it's overwhelming until people see what's possible. And, you know, until then, I said, like, some of these stereotypes and unconscious bias, whatever you want to talk about, it can't be conquered with more information. It can be overcome with new experiences.
Sure, sure.
But those need to be constructed, right? I mean, they don't happen in a vacuum.
Absolutely. Go ahead with your presentation.
So I'm gonna, you know, just skip through some of this stuff. So what I have basically really, I think slide number 9 is said, really, if you want to start anything from whatever stage, whether you're 1 or 2 person or a big company, you really only need clarity on 3 questions. So how is the industry changing? How are consumers evolving? And where are there emerging opportunities? And so the maps that we have in our design framework are just basically to answer those questions. So we have a product map that's kind of shows you what the landscape is today, which I'll show in a minute. And then we also show, okay, who are the customers? What are their lives like? What are the user stories? Those are put on the same map and those are overlaid. So this is a big difference with most design frameworks, is that a lot of these information is captured, but it's captured in very different places. So synthesizing, when you want to say simplicity, 1-page strategy, this is the only framework I know of where the information about the landscape and the consumers is put on the same page. And there's a little bit of a magic to putting it on this, because otherwise people are kind of going back and forth and getting dizzy and trying to figure out what it all means, even if they have the same information. And I think the challenge is always capturing the implicit insight. You know, when it's presented visually, a non-business person, a non-expert can give their feedback, which is critical. But if you have everything buried in Excel, you're limiting the people who can help you. So what we really did is say that you have to have a way of measuring the emotional payoff. So when you look at products, you don't even care or consider what is the market share of different products. What you really do is map existing products according to the consumer experience they provide. So you have these 4 quadrants. So on the lower left is like a basic. So we use kind of the paper clip as the analogy. Like there's very little explanation needed. There's very little interaction. You have a small, you know, here, this is how it works. And then on the bottom right, you have more features and functionalities. So we've kind of used the Swiss Army knife as the metaphor. Which products give you a lot of versatility, you know, multifunctional. And then we have the Mona Lisa on the top left, which is basically saying, okay, this is this very highly artistic, highly designed, but it's not super interactive. You can be transformed by looking at a beautiful piece of art or whatever, but you are not really interacting with it much in any direct fashion, but it can still make an impact on you. And the enriched is like a Ferrari, which is basically saying this is this multifunctional, multi-sensory. It's something that you tend to identify with. And so a lot of like premium brands do that, but it's not limited to that. We're basically argue that this is only to describe the quality of experience. So you can have a budget product that still gives you a Ferrari quality of experience. So to show an illustration, let me go to the next slide. If you were to map something like cell phones, in the basic quadrant, you would have like, okay, like a jitterbug phone that doesn't have any great functionality, but what it does do is it has a voice amplifier. It might be someone who wants to communicate on a limited basis, bare bones, or like the track phone at Walmart or something like that. And then you see in the artistic, maybe someone wants to use this almost as a fashion accessory, a lot of blinged out cases and things like that. The versatile one may be something where it has a lot more memory. I can send documents, I can do gaming, those kinds of work type of functions. So you can kind of get an outlay. And then what we would do is we'd take all the consumer information and create kind of the persona, the user story. And I mean, I'm sure that you've probably seen this in many different ways. So I will send a galley of the book so I can, show.
Please, yes.
Because then also, we also have a set of questions. If people are going through this and they're not sure what goes where, somebody can literally, this is a back of the napkin. This is not a software-based thing. you can do this. Literally, I've printed out maps and had people do this by hand. So then when you take the user stories, I might have in the basic category an older person who wants to keep track of family and friends, not using their phone much for like texting and chatting and stuff. So these are, stereotypes, so don't get offended. This was like from, 10 years old. So, and then there's maybe somebody who's very artistic and, fashionista, values all the bling. And then there might be like, in the versatile category, someone who really needs this for work and presentations, needs a lot of memory, and somebody who's maybe a gamer who also needs a lot of communication, speed, and for a different set of reasons. And then there might be some other people floating around who are saying, okay, if I'm taking cues from everything else they've done in their life, that they're very much into identifying with their brands and doing things. So what we do is then you just take these two maps, but you can actually put them together and say, oh, there are people floating around with unmet needs. And the implication of this is not that, everybody needs to go to the upper right-hand side at all. In fact, many of the most successful products, they've developed the Ferrari, and to make it a mass market success, they've actually had to curate and bring things down a little bit. And there are very successful companies in all of these categories. In this case, we are basically saying, that's where the opportunity for the iPhone and items like that suddenly became visible, that, wow, this is kind of versatile and interactive and multisensory. So at the time the book was written, that was the example that people could latch on to. But you can see this in many different categories. And now you see like that kind of functionality being delivered in the $20 phones that are coming out. So we're not trying to say that you need to go to premium pricing or that everything needs to be made very complicated or whatever else. It's a very curated, like, how do you understand where your consumers are? This all flows from the story. But the beauty of this is that, like I said, a lot of things take 2 to 3 years to execute. Mm-hmm. As you discover new user stories, you just add it onto the map, right? As brands start to shift and do different things, you just move this along. You don't have to write another 300 pages and hope that people figure out what's relevant. And the nice thing about this that we've found is really a lot of the implicit knowledge of people at all levels in organizations can be put into this. Like the sales guy can say, hey, you know what? I don't see that customer doing X, Y, and Z. And you can shift these things around very easily as new information is discovered. And, you might also say, oh, maybe the real opportunity is not where we thought it was. Maybe it's here. Maybe this category of consumers is bigger than we initially realized. So I think representing this thing visually has its own kind of magic, simply because everybody can comment on it, right? Whether it's the consumer themselves. And I have seen cases, where we've had companies, I used to work with a design firm with my co-author when we were writing the book. We've had companies that have collected $10, $15 million of consumer research. So it wasn't a lack of listening. That becomes paralyzing if you do not put it on to what are they delivering emotionally to kind of have that common language. It's paralyzing. And then people go down that rabbit hole. One country likes blue, one country likes green. Where do you even start? Good people just finally end up doing something that is, I need to get something out the door. They just get very fatigued and fed up. And that is a real shame, because now there is a lot of capital floating around. There are people who are willing to write checks for the right ideas. And I just basically have said, people always used to look at design as like, this is my strategic risk. I'm like, no, design is your strategic insurance, because you would have spent all this time, effort, money, credibility on the line to do something. And I think you can shift the odds in favor of success by saying there is a little bit more upfront work involved. But, I think having something that connects with people, because even if it's not fully successful, if they're connected and invested in some way, they help you figure it out, right? When Apple screws up, their users they actually write the corrections, right? They help the company pick up the pieces and say, oh, okay. So I think that people who are creators also need that community of friends to help call out missteps, give the encouragement, give the feedback. And there are other people you say, okay, this sucks, I'm going to throw it in the trash and write a bad review. There are other people who are like, I kind of like this. Let me make a suggestion. Let me actually create an app to undo this problem. So that's where I say, innovation just can't succeed all the time. And that's where emotional connection is actually more important when it hasn't succeeded. And even in pharma and unusual industries, there are people who are like, okay, there's this new warning on a drug, but there are communities of consumers now who are saying, well, the FDA may have one view, but I and my community like this drug and we don't want to see it taken off the market. So can we sign something saying we accept this risk? Unheard of before.
Yeah. That's I like very much if you can send me the visuals, I will really appreciate it. By the way, I have your book.
Okay. Yeah, so I just used
I haven't reached that far, but this is more interesting in the sense that you are explaining the dimensions of the model, which is, I think, critical for us to. And as you explain it, I'm thinking in terms of possible applications or things we can do together. One first that I think is an article for the review that will help people to understand this. Maybe based on something you already published, or you want to focus more in this idea of how design can work at different levels. But I'm thinking in terms also of our primary direct project, which is twofold. We have Barcelona on one side, on the upper echelon, if you want, and Barrio 31 in the BOP extreme of the continuum. Those two are very close to start. So if we have something to just call their attention about these topics in the form of an article, we can maybe make a meeting. I will be in August traveling, but in September. So we can discuss possible ideas, a little more, knowing more about what do you think about things that could be done for Barcelona agency, Barcelona Activa, in terms of possible programs. I will forward you the article that Enrique from Barcelona wrote, describing what they are trying to do. So that will give you a framework about them. And I think I sent you Unleashing Social Capital and something about Barrio 31, so you have a better idea of what they are trying to do right there. But this is the first thing that comes to my mind in terms of something we can discuss. And if you were able to be in October in Washington, I'm having the Barcelona people, and maybe also I can get Diego Fernandez from Barrio 31.
Okay, so you said that was October 8th?
October 8th, exactly.
Okay. All right, so let me see if I can rearrange things to...
Sure. Go ahead.
I'm going to be going to India in August, and then September, I'm in the Philippines and Turkey, but for speeches, not for like very long periods of time. But then October actually looks good. So,
oh, wonderful. That's your dog agrees.
Not my dog. I would not keep these things at this kind of bark around.
Don't worry.
And they're not cute enough that you can forgive that bark. I was like, I mean, it's just like, yikes, rattles your brain.
Yeah. I'm a cat person now, but used to have a lot of dogs around, and I'm familiar with the song. But anyway, yes, if you can confirm it, I can arrange because we are going to have a morning for the presentation, the Kaufman Awards, but I would like to have an opportunity to meet you, to introduce you to them, and to before that, because if we can do something in September,
Okay.
in October we will be able to do the emotional part of going to your model and give them. I think you and them will work pretty well together. John knows both, so.
Yeah, I'll keep my fingers crossed. And what I will do is I will send you that article about goodwill. I mean, it's a very interesting list of courses. There are things that I think we get so far ahead of trying to find the coolest, newest thing, or just really overlook that, a lot of people need help with, fairly simple things and that are attainable. It's quite an interesting case. So I'll send you that article.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I keep thinking in terms of the old department stores used to be training grounds for not just the workforce, but the customers.
Yep.
For example, if you remember Pretty Woman,
yep.
the scene of the woman who goes with Richard Gere and starts trying things on and getting some kind of sense of how is it like to move in a different social environment. And that's exactly what Macy's and Bloomingdale's did for the middle class and people moving in from outside. Also, what Sears catalog did for the farmers. So you started to figure out, okay, how to wear, how should I get my person prepared for applying for a job in a city or selling this or using this invention in my town. So that kind of connection is really, really interesting. And because we have in the barrio this kind of a lab, and also Barcelona has this series of places in the city where they are open to try things, that will be an interesting ground to try some of these concepts, to see what comes out of applying things in prosumers and different groups in different cities. That would be.
That's exactly what the Taj hotels in India does. Is their entire philosophy, and there's a Harvard Business School case study on this. They said, how is it that this hotel was attacked? Everybody who was in there, it's an old building, so they all knew how to escape. Why did none of the employees really take those tunnels? Why did they all stay? Some get shot and protect all of the customers and hotel guests over 48 hours. And they said, what they did is they did not recruit from all these elite schools. What they did was they've always had a policy of recruiting people from the heartland. And they said, what they don't need to be trained for is how to take care of people. And they said when one person from those communities gets a job, it's like a big uplift for the entire joint family, for people back home. And so there's this tremendous level of commitment. And they said, we can't really ascribe it to anything else. I mean, but literally, I know somebody in San Diego who was there during that attack, and they said, these guys, to prevent people from getting panicked, they were making tea for people in the middle of this siege. They were holding bed sheets around people so they could use the restroom. I mean, it was just above and beyond. And he said, when that hotel opens, I don't care what else I'm doing, I am going to be there on opening day. I will fly into Mumbai because I have never seen anything like this. And they never fired, even if you had been a temp worker, they said, while we're rebuilding this, we will not fire one single person, no matter what it costs. So even if you had been working a day, if you were present on that day, they also made a commitment to take care of every single employee's children's education all the way up to the graduate level, whether it was in India or overseas. And, this is interesting because Ratan Tata, they just said, well, this is like above and beyond what any liability framework from any country would say. And they presented a plan to him and they said, well, what was your reaction? And so he paused and he said, if we did all this, is it enough?
Yeah.
So that was his question, because he said, we depend on the community for our survival, not the other way around.
Exactly. And that's a key factor also that I would like to round up with this, because I think perhaps the most telling difference between the way BOP and developed markets work is the role of community in the process.
Absolutely. But ironically, this is what I find fascinating, is that if you look at, even in technology, whatever else, which are the companies that make it? The ones that create a community. That is the one thing poor people actually have. And if you look at how wealth was created in the ancient world, it was all through textiles. And what is that measured by? Knots per square inch, and thread count. How is that different from how we look at networks? It's exactly the same. It's the quality of connections and the number of connections.
Yeah, exactly. We tend to overlook the fact that when we say Motown, the town part is as important with like the motors. So it was Detroit, the site, or it was Silicon Valley, or these places where Fairchild was developing transistors. It was also hosting a first community well before. I mean, the grandparents of the current Googles, but it was basically a community of people developing multiple activities. So I think that it tends to get lost because we get too big and too spread out and too fascinated with other technologies. But when you go back to places like an old town like Barcelona, or a neighborhood in inner city in a place like Buenos Aires, then you start, the danger is to overlook that, to forget that collectively these people form a community, and that community is creating a lot of things, has a lot of back channels.
And that's the social safety net. I mean, that's what I said. It's like, well, yeah, we don't have like this formal social safety net, but you had a thing called family and community. Always kind of plugged in, no matter what the issue is. And that's what they're finding even with microfinance in India. Some of these people are saying, no, bring the money lenders back, because the banks do not understand who is genuinely in hardship and who is just not taking responsibility. And they said the money lenders lived in the local community, so they kind of understood when to show mercy, whereas for everyone else they really don't. And they actually have shown suicides and all these things have gone up when they've professionalized these functions.
Exactly. And that's another interesting point, very interesting point, because by chance of destiny, this particular place in Buenos Aires, Barrio 31, is isolated. So we have like a Galapagos Islands to Darwin. So in there, all the species inside are native. They have been there for 70 years. So this is second, third generation of people living, trading, working, and obviously organizing themselves in different ways to survive. Now we are there introducing banks and McDonald's and formal businesses, but the idea is what is going on with the structure. We are now studying what is not studied, which is the ways, the financing networks, the commercial networks, the families that work. For example, all the people coming from a certain country tend to specialize in a certain industry or activity. So you have all the Bolivian people working in masonry, whereas the Peruvians are good at restaurants and food. And,
All the ceviche.
and then they are all related. I mean, one is cousin or almost cousin of the other, and friends and family loans are preliminary to other things. So if we cannot see those things in any kind of report. So we are trying to help people to feel confident to identify those networks. And perhaps one way is to drop some bottles of Coke and let them see what they can do with that.
Mariano, is usually I just take the name of different countries out and I just say, tell me which country this is. And people are very shocked at what America looks like. And because the thing is that the averages hide all the nuances, right? I mean, that's what I say. If you look at the BOP, you would miss all the potential. And if you look here and drive by, you would miss all of the hardship and all of the pain too, if you only relied on the visual.
Generalizations at best is useful lies.
Yeah.
Well, but that's why transforming she's awesome. I love that book.
and it's incredible, but it's as you said, it's like you can replace the names and said, okay, instead of this country, maybe it's this other. So it's just that we as Americans forget that the United States was a developing country in 1964. So we had the same history back then. And a lot of the heartland of the country is still pretty similar to these stories.
And in that, the good part about that is I still think that the individuals who choose to proceed with kind of a moral vision, not just a financial vision, can make such a huge lasting impact that goes for generations. But that's why the system needs to be, I would say in India, like, if you don't change the system, you're not going to get those philanthropists who plug the holes, like Andrew Carnegie, who said, this country made me what I am, and therefore I'm going to put a public library in every small town. If people feel their success was despite the system and not because of the system, you won't get really effective philanthropy. You're not going to get sustained interest in doing any of these social things. If people like, oh, everyone feels like a victim, I fought tooth and nail, so why can't everyone else? Instead of having people saying, wow, I've been so fortunate. I need to do something for others. It's always going to be and I think that's what's happening now. There's a lot of money. A lot of Asian countries just don't have, they give lots to friends and family, but they don't have the institutions to really do any kind of philanthropy. That's what they found in Japan after that nuclear reactor. They're like, we just don't even have anything. Like, where do you donate? We've just never created this instrument at all.
Yeah. And it's, by the way, are you in touch with the author?
Oh yeah, she's a good friend.
Great. I would like to contact her because I think her study has a lot of points in common with what we are starting to do in Barrio 31 about understanding the psychology and the culture of the consumer and the business environment in a specific context.
Yeah, she's an old MBA student of my father's from way back.
Oh, look at that.
And she's great though. It really puts all the findings in a simple language that people can just immediately understand. And in person, she's great, very conversational. Like, she can explain very complex things in simple language that, and she was also on the board of the best companies like Infosys and others. So understands the high end and the and the low end quite well.
Which person is this?
So her name is Rama Bijapurkar. She has written this study of kind of the emerging income classes in India, but she has done a lot of work with huge companies and been on a number of corporate boards. And but she's like, okay, this explains a lot of trends and different classes of people based on their aspirations, not just the lifestyle of like, okay, what are the priorities? And that a lot of companies, all of them basically use like, okay, fine. It's just kind of infected the lingo of how people talk about different consumer classes in India. But she's also, I know there's the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth and other things. So I think she's on some of these international boards as well.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Oh, that's a great finding. So if you can
I have
contact her, I will love to have a conversation and see more. I just started reading the book, but I found a lot of common ground, and of course with all this experience and a variety. Again, I think human cultures are only so different.
Yeah.
Besides all the other things, you start finding out a similar story coming over and over. But since we have so many different paths we went through, so it's important to be able to look at, okay, we are in that stage. Obviously, these kind of studies in a country like India are very, very helpful to understand what's going in Latin America. Anyway.
Definitely.
Wonderful. So wrapping up, I will send the recording, or if you can send me the PowerPoint or the slides.
Sure.
So I have
the slides I sent last night, and I have,
okay.
So yeah, you have those already, but I'll send you the article about Goodwill.
Wonderful. I will do my homework in regards to letting you know. If you confirm it, if you can be on October, I will confirm also with Enrique and with Barrio 31, Diego, and other people I know. So we make, you're coming more productive for you and for us, so we can maybe start a September conversation. Once I get I will send you the Enrique article about Barcelona, so you have both things, and I will try to establish a connection so we can have a conversation in September.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks so much. Have a safe trip in August when you're traveling.
Yes.
And you as well.
Thanks so much.
To be continued.